The Time Machine Did It by John Swartzwelder, Chapter 2. He was a scraggly, smelly specimen, looking even less promising than most of my clients, but he breezed in like the Secretary of the Treasury. "I am Thomas Dewey Mandible III, he announced. He seemed to think that was a name that should create a sensation in my office, that I should faint dead away upon hearing it, or call the newspapers and tell them to hold the front page because guess who was in my office? But it didn't create much of a sensation. In fact, I was a little disappointed he'd come in right at that moment. I asked him if he wanted to go get some spaghetti with me. We could talk over his problem there, while we were seeing how much we could eat, but he wasn't hungry. I sighed and motioned for him to sit down in my client chair. Since he seemed so aristocratic, I was glad I'd decided to designate the best chair I had, the one that didn't violently fall over periodically, as my client chair. "What can I do for you, Mr. Mandible?" He informed me that he was a multimillionaire, the wealthiest man in the city. I looked him over with a skeptical eye and made a discreet snorting sound. He bristled. "What is the meaning of that snort, young man? Don't I look like a wealthy man to you?" "Yeah, I guess so, kind of. But you look more like a tramp, or maybe a maniac." For a moment it looked like he was going to sock me, but that would have been inadvisable. He might have had the style, but he didn't have the weight. I guess he realized that because he quickly calmed down and told me what had brought him here. He said he had been a multimillionaire when he had gone to bed the night before in stately Mandible Manor. But somehow during the night he was robbed of everything he owned. His money, his clothes, his house, bank accounts, stocks, everything he had in the world was gone. "I woke up this morning in a cardboard box, which I was told to get out of because it wasn't mine." "Sounds like a very serious robbery you've had there," I said. "Yes." He brooded for a moment, then continued. "But none of that is important." "No, of course not, I can see that." I made a circular motion with my finger around my temple to indicate I thought this guy was crazy, forgetting that there was no one in the room to see this circular motion except him. He saw it and frowned. "That is to say, it's important, but it need not concern you. I will handle the recovering of my fortune, but during the robbery I also lost an item of enormous sentimental value to me. That is what I want you to find." He handed me a picture of a figurine about 12 inches high of Justice holding the scales, that statuey-looking thing you see when you're watching one of those courtroom dramas on TV. The figurine didn't look very valuable to me. I guess he could see that in my face, and hear it in the raspberry I blew. "It has no monetary value, as you have guessed," he said, "but it is my family's most prized possession. It belonged to my grandfather. Get it back for me, and you can name your own price." I thought about his story, and consulted my notes. I realized I couldn't read my notes, and had forgotten most of his story. Sometimes my clients have to explain their problems to me more than once. I don't charge them for that. It's part of the service, I figure. If the case is really complicated, I might ask a smarter detective, or the guy who runs the elevator, to sit in and simplify the whole thing for me. You can't be vain about these things. You can only bluff your client for so long. Then you have to admit you didn't understand what he was talking about and you've forgotten his name, and to please start again. And the longer you put off admitting it, the madder he's going to be. I made Mandible run through his story again. He was mad, but like I said, not as mad as he would have been later. I studied the picture of the figurine he'd given me. I could probably find your house easier. "Just the figurine, Mr. Burley. Find that and you will have earned your fee." "What do you suspect? Who do you suspect? Who steals from you normally?" He said his family had always had trouble with a group of idle lowlifes called poor people. Ever since Mandible Manor was built, poor people had been plaguing it, squatting on the extensive grounds, stealing fruit from the trees and so on. Some of them even lived in the walls of the manor itself. You could hear them at night, sometimes, when they scuttled out to play the piano. It might have been one of them, or it could have been one of these pest control people I bring in periodically to spray for poor people. Or it could have been a common burglar, but that's what I'm paying you to find out. I closed my notebook and told him I'd get right on it, but I figured I'd better be honest with the man. You've got to have a bond of mutual trust with your client. "I've got to warn you," I warned him. I'm a pretty lousy detective, all things considered. I mean, I don't know if things like that matter to you, but I stink. He said he knew that before he came up here. No decent detective would take a case like this. He had already asked them, and they had already said no. So he had to take what he could get. He dug into his smelly pocket and pulled out a squalid checkbook. He tore off a check that had flies buzzing around it and handed it to me. I'm giving you a blank check. Why? I don't have any money in the bank, but I will soon. Don't worry about the money. Just get going and solve this case. In fact, here are 5 more blank checks. That's how important this case is. I agreed to take the case and toss the blank checks in a drawer. I didn't have any other clients at the moment, and I didn't think my stomach could take another bodyguard job right now. Maybe this would turn into something. Mandible left as regally as he had entered. I put on my hat, got my gun and notepad, and headed for the door to see what kind of start I could make on this case. My secretary watched me go. Suspiciously. You're not going to be fooling around with any of those criminal women, are you? She asked. I told her that wasn't too likely, the way my day was going, but she would be the third to know.